It was just past 7 a.m. when Daniel Parker opened his eyes. The alarm hadn't even rung yet, but he was already awake, like every other morning. At 17, sleep didn't come easy to him anymore. His room was small, quiet, and filled with shadows. On the walls were posters of things he used to love. Soccer, science fiction movies, a band that had broken up years ago. The posters were faded now, just like his joy. Daniel wasn't the kind of boy people noticed. He didn't wear expensive shoes. He didn't talk loudly or make jokes that got the room laughing. He walked with his head slightly down, eyes avoiding others, always thinking about how to get through the next hour, the next day, the next week. His school uniform was neat, but a little too short at the wrists, the shirt a little too faded. He slipped it on with quiet movements, careful not to wake his mother. She worked nights at the hospital, and most mornings, she came home just as he was leaving. They hardly ever saw each other awake. Sometimes he found her asleep on the couch, still wearing her scrubs, a half-eaten sandwich on the table. The house was old, with creaky stairs and windows that didn't shut properly. In winter, cold air crept in through the cracks. But Daniel never complained. Complaining felt like asking too much. And asking meant risking disappointment, something he had grown tired of. He walked to school, as usual. It wasn't far, but it felt like miles. His backpack felt heavier than it should, not because of the books, but because of the thoughts he carried. Thoughts that told him he wasn't enough, that he'd never be enough. At school, no one waited for him. He wasn't the boy whose name echoed in the halls. He wasn't the one people whispered about because he was funny, smart, or good-looking. He was just Daniel, the boy in the second row, the boy who didn't raise his hand, the boy who got C's even though he stayed up late studying, the boy who everyone forgot the moment he left the room. Lunchtime was the worst part of the day. Tables were filled with laughter, jokes, and loud voices. Daniel sat alone under the staircase, in the far corner of the cafeteria. He'd bring a sandwich from home, always the same, peanut butter, no jelly. Not because he liked it that way, but because it was what they could afford. He never minded. He was used to being overlooked, even by life. There were kids who made fun of him sometimes. Not always with words. Sometimes it was just a look. A laugh shared between two people, while their eyes glanced at him. Sometimes it was louder. Comments. About his shoes, his hair, the way he walked. But Daniel never reacted. He had learned that silence was safer than speaking. That looking down was better than looking back. But behind that silence was a storm. A deep ache he couldn't describe. A hunger. Not for food, but for recognition. For someone to say, "I see you." For someone to believe in him. Just once. The teachers didn't help much. They called on the same few students every day. If Daniel ever spoke, they'd nod quickly and move on, as if checking a box. He wasn't failing, but he wasn't shining either. He lived in the grey space, invisible, quiet, unnoticed. That afternoon, as he walked home, Daniel passed a group of kids laughing loudly. One of them looked at him and smirked. "Hey, look who it is, the ghost of classroom 4B. The others laughed. Daniel forced a smile and kept walking. But inside, he felt it again. That slow, sinking feeling, like a stone falling into water. He got home and saw a note on the fridge. His mom had gone to sleep early. Dinner was in the oven. He ate alone, staring at the wall. The television was off. His phone had no new messages, no missed calls, no one checking in. In the quiet, Daniel went to his room, opened his old notebook, and began to write. Not homework. Just thoughts, feelings, hopes he hadn't spoken aloud. "Maybe one day," he wrote, "I'll matter." He didn't know it yet, but that small sentence, those 3 quiet words, would be the beginning of everything, the start of something he couldn't yet imagine. For now, he was just a boy the world laughed at, or worse, ignored. But soon, the world would remember his name. The next day felt like any other, but Daniel didn't know the kind of storm that was waiting. For him, it started in the classroom as usual. He slipped into his seat quietly. The morning announcements crackled through the speakers, while students chatted and scrolled through their phones. Mr. Bennett, the history teacher, stood at the front of the room, adjusting his tie and sipping coffee from a chipped mug. "All right, class," Mr. Bennett said. Today's assignment will be a group project. Daniel's heart sank. Group project. 2 words that made him feel sick. Every time there was a group project, he ended up alone, or stuck with people who ignored him completely. Names were read out. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. And Daniel, you're with Tyler, Marcus, and Bree, the teacher finished. Daniel felt a cold drop of sweat on his back. Tyler, the loudest boy in class. Marcus, his best friend and shadow. And Bree, the girl who always seemed half annoyed just to exist near him. As he walked over to join them, the other 3 didn't even look at him. Tyler leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Great, he muttered. We got the statue. Marcus chuckled. Maybe he'll just sit there and let us do all the work. Bree sighed. Let's just pick a topic. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, to offer an idea, but Bree cut in. Don't worry about it. We've got it. He nodded and sat quietly, shrinking into the background. Again. After class, they walked past him in the hallway like he wasn't there. Tyler nudged Marcus and whispered something. Both laughed and looked back. Daniel didn't ask. He didn't want to know. At lunch, his usual corner was taken. A group of kids had spilled over to his hiding spot. With nowhere else to go, he sat on a bench outside. The wind was cold. He opened his sandwich and tried not to look around. Then it happened. He heard the laughter first. A sharp, cruel voice rang out. Hey, look who thinks he's too cool for everyone. It was Tyler. Behind him stood Marcus, Bree, and a few others. Daniel looked up, surprised. He wasn't doing anything. Tyler walked over, grabbed Daniel's notebook from his side, and flipped it open. What's this? He said, mockingly. A diary. Marcus peered over his shoulder and burst out laughing. Look, he writes poems. This one says, One day, I'll fly away. What are you, a bird? The pages passed from hand to hand, torn from the spiral binding like nothing. Daniel jumped up. Give it back! He shouted, his voice cracking, but the damage was already done. Bree read one aloud in a mocking tone, her voice high and dramatic. The world forgot me, but I still breathe. Wow. That's deep, man. You okay? She laughed and tossed the page onto the ground. Daniel bent to pick it up, but Tyler shoved him gently, and he fell to one knee. The laughter got louder, then silence. A teacher had seen and was walking over. Tyler stepped back quickly. We were just joking, he said with a shrug. Daniel picked up his torn papers and walked away without a word. Later that day, back home, he sat in his room holding the notebook, what was left of it. Some of the poems were gone. Others were torn in half. He didn't cry, not because he wasn't hurt, but because the pain had grown too familiar. Tears didn't come easily anymore. He opened a new page and wrote, They laugh at the boy they never tried to know. They see a shadow and forget there's a soul. But shadows can grow teeth, and even silence learns to roar. He paused. His hands trembled slightly. Inside, something began to shift. Not anger, not revenge, but something deeper. A question. What if I don't stay silent this time? That night, dinner was quiet. His mother had cooked pasta and left it for him on the stove. She was already asleep. The house was dim and quiet. Even the clock ticked slower than usual. He sat in the kitchen with the notebook beside his plate, untouched. His thoughts swirled like storm clouds, not just about the laughter, not just about the torn pages, but about how easy it had been for them to break something that had taken him years to build. Words that had kept him sane, pieces of himself that he never shared with anyone. Was he really that invisible, or had he just let himself become that way? Lying in bed that night, Daniel stared at the ceiling. His mind replayed the scene again. Bree's voice, Tyler's push, Marcus's laugh, the poems on the ground. He whispered softly to himself, maybe I'm not the problem. Maybe they are. It was the first time he had ever said that out loud. His heart raced a little, not because he was scared, but because, finally, he had said something that felt like truth. Something had changed, and it would never go back to the way it was. The next morning was colder than usual. Daniel sat at the edge of his bed, still holding the broken notebook from the day before. He hadn't slept much, The words that had been mocked still echoed in his head. He looked at the torn pages once again. Some of the most personal lines were gone forever. And yet, a strange feeling stayed in his chest. Not pain, not sadness, but something new. It was quiet, but steady, like a small flame trying to stay alive in the wind. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. His hair was messy. His eyes were tired. But for the first time, he looked at himself, not through the eyes of others, but through his own. They laughed. But they read it, he whispered. That thought stuck with him. They didn't just ignore his words. They reacted to them. Laughed at them, yes. Mocked them, yes. But they read them. That meant the words had power. Even if they tried to tear him down, it meant he had said something that got under their skin. That morning, he made a small choice. He took a new notebook from his desk drawer. It was blank, clean, untouched. He held it carefully, like something sacred. This time, he didn't write about sadness or pain. He wrote about strength, about standing up, about being seen, about finding light even in the darkest room. The words weren't perfect, but they were honest, and with every sentence, that small fire inside him grew. At school, things felt the same on the surface. Tyler and Marcus still joked. Bree still acted, like she didn't care. But Daniel wasn't the same. He didn't sit under the staircase that day. Instead, he went to the library. It was quiet, peaceful, and warm. He sat by the window with his new notebook and kept writing. That's when someone new appeared. "Hey, you're Daniel, right?" He looked up. A girl he had seen before but never spoken to stood beside the table. Her name was Mia. She was in his English class. Always quiet, but not invisible like him. "I saw what happened yesterday," she said gently. "With your poems." He froze. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry they did that," she continued. "But your writing was actually really good." Daniel blinked. You read it?" She smiled. "Yeah. One of the pages flew past my feet. I picked it up. I didn't want to embarrass you, so I didn't say anything." He didn't know what to say. No one had ever said his words were good, not even his teachers. "You should keep writing," she said. Seriously. Then she walked away, leaving Daniel stunned. It wasn't a long conversation. It wasn't a grand moment. But to Daniel, it felt like sunlight breaking through a cloudy sky. That evening, he couldn't stop thinking about it. One person. One kind word. That was all it took to shift something deep inside him. Maybe I'm not invisible. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there was listening. He sat down at his desk and wrote something new. "I thought I was alone, but even shadows can be followed by light. Even whispers can be heard, if someone chooses to listen." This time, he didn't hide the page. He placed it on his desk, left open. It was a small act of courage, but to him, it meant everything. Over the next few days, he returned to the library, again and again. It became his space, a place where he didn't feel judged or afraid. Mia sat with him sometimes. They didn't talk much, but it felt good not to be alone. One day, she showed him a school flyer. "There's a writing contest," she said. "Theme: finding your voice. You should enter." He hesitated. "I don't know." "You don't have to win," she said. "Just try." The thought scared him. What if people laughed again? What if Tyler saw it? What if the whole school found out? But then he remembered that moment by the mirror. That feeling of fire. That tiny voice inside him that had started to whisper, "You have something to say." That night, he sat at his desk for hours. He wrote, erased, rewrote, started again. The poem wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about fighting through it. It was about growing from it. When he finally finished, he read it aloud to himself. His voice was soft, but steady. For the first time, he didn't hear doubt in his own words. He printed the poem, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it with shaking hands. The next day, he stood outside the submission box in the hallway, staring at it. His heart pounded. His palms were sweaty. He looked around. No one was watching. "You can walk away," a voice inside him said. But another voice, newer, stronger, replied, or you can be heard. With a deep breath, he dropped the envelope into the box. It was done. No one cheered. There was no music, no spotlight. But something had changed. He had made a choice, a small choice. But sometimes, it only takes one step to start a journey. And Daniel had finally taken his. Daniel felt a spark of pride when he walked past the submission box the next morning. He had done something he'd never done before, put his voice into the world without hiding. But confidence isn't built in a day. That week at school, things didn't magically get better. Tyler and Marcus were still loud, still rude, still laughing. In the hallways. They hadn't seen the contest entry yet. Daniel hoped they never would. For now, he kept quiet, kept his head down. But inside, something was different. Each evening, Daniel returned to his notebook. He wrote without fear now. Some poems were strong, others felt weak. But he kept writing. It became his routine, like breathing. One afternoon, Mia sat beside him at their usual library table. She pulled out her phone and smiled. "You won't believe this," she said, turning the screen toward him. The school's online bulletin board showed a message. Finalists announced. Writing contest. Daniel's name was on the list. He stared at it, his mouth slightly open. "See?" Mia said. "Told you." His heart raced. A finalist. That meant his work would be read out loud at the school's arts night. People, teachers, students, even parents, would hear it. Fear crept in right beside the joy. What if they laughed? Again? What if Tyler found out? That fear followed him all week. At night, he dreamed of standing on a stage and freezing, or worse, hearing laughter before he even opened his mouth. He tried to push it away, but the voice in his head grew louder. "You're not ready. You're not good enough. You'll embarrass yourself." The day of the performance arrived. Daniel sat backstage in a folding chair, hands shaking. The gym was full. Students filled the rows. Parents whispered and took pictures. The microphone stood tall under a bright spotlight. His name was third on the list. "Are you okay?" Mia asked gently. She was presenting too, but she seemed calm. "I don't know if I can do this," Daniel said, staring at the floor. She leaned closer. "Your words matter. Let them hear them." He took a deep breath. Then his name was called. The world blurred as he walked to the mic. His hands trembled. The paper he held shook. He looked out. So many faces. For a second he almost ran. But then he saw one person near the back. His English teacher, Ms. Carter. She nodded once, slowly, as if saying, "You've got this." He looked at Mia, who gave him a quiet thumbs up. Daniel took a breath, then another, and he began. His voice was shaky at first, but the words came. The poem wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about standing in the middle of pain and choosing not to hide. As he read, the room grew quiet, really quiet. No phones, no whispers, just silence and his voice. When he finished, there was a pause. Then, clapping. Real clapping. Not polite, not forced. People were clapping for him. His heart felt like it might burst. He walked off stage almost in a daze. Mia hugged him. "You did it," she said, smiling wide. He had done it, but victories don't come without setbacks. The next morning, Daniel found a piece of paper in his locker. It was one of his old poems, photocopied, with red scribbles mocking his words. "Deep, bro," it said in fake handwriting. "Maybe next time add some sparkles." Below it, someone had drawn a crying cartoon face. He crumpled the paper in his fist. Tyler. He was sure it was him. Maybe not directly, but he was behind it somehow. For a moment, Daniel felt that fire inside, him dim. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not meant for this. He skipped lunch and went to the library, sat in the far back corner, head down. Mia found him later. "You okay?" He showed her the paper. She frowned. "Don't let them win. You're doing something they're too afraid to try. That's why they're trying to break you." He looked at her. "But it still hurts." "I know," she said softly. "But pain means you care. It means you're alive. Use it." That night, Daniel didn't write a poem. He sat at his desk, staring at a blank page for hours. Doubt crept in again. What if he was just pretending? What if all of this, arts night, the contest, the attention, Was just a fluke? Was he really strong? Or just lucky? The next day he got his answer. He was walking through the hallway when a younger student tapped his shoulder. "Hey," the boy said shyly. I heard your poem at Arts Night. I really liked it." Daniel blinked. "You did?" The boy nodded. "It made me feel like I wasn't the only one. So, thanks." Then he hurried off. Daniel stood frozen. That small sentence hit deeper than all the laughter, deeper than the doubt. He had reached someone. He mattered. Not because he was the loudest, not because he was perfect, but because he was honest. That evening he wrote again. This time the poem wasn't sad, it was strong. Not loud, but solid. It talked about failing and trying again, about being afraid but moving forward anyway, about rising, even when the world tried to keep you small. Daniel had struggled, he had doubted, but now he had something more powerful than fear. He had purpose, and he wasn't going to stop. For a while, things were finally looking up. Daniel walked through the school halls with a little more confidence. People nodded at him. Some even smiled. A few classmates who never spoke to him before told him they liked his poetry. He wasn't popular. He wasn't a star, but he wasn't invisible anymore. Every day, he kept writing. His notebook was now full of words that felt alive. Words about pain, about hope, about standing back up when life tried to knock you down. Ms. Carter even asked him to share a piece in the school newsletter, and Mia, she was always around. They had become real friends now. She made him laugh. She believed in him. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like maybe, just maybe, he was becoming who he was meant to be. But life doesn't let things stay easy for long. It happened. On a Thursday, he was walking into the library when he noticed something strange. Students whispering, others laughing behind their hands, some glancing at him, then quickly looking away. He felt it before he knew it. Something was wrong. When he sat down at his usual table, Mia rushed in, her face pale. "Daniel," she said, sliding her phone toward him. "I'm so sorry, I just saw this." He picked up the phone, and his heart dropped. A video of him, standing on stage at Arts Night, reading his poem. But it wasn't just the poem. Someone had edited it. They had added sound effects, silly music, fake crying, and laughing tracks over his voice. Words like emo loser and try hard popped up in bright colors on the screen. The video was spreading fast, over 2,000 views, shared across student group chats, liked, commented on. "What is this?" he whispered, his throat tight. "I think Tyler posted it," Mia said. "Someone recorded your performance, then they twisted it." Daniel stared at the screen. Every line of his poem, words that came from his soul, were now turned into a joke. He felt sick. He didn't go to class that day. He sat in the empty art room, head buried in his arms. His body was shaking, not from cold, but from shame, anger, and confusion all crashing into each other. Why would someone do this? Why now? Just when he thought things were finally changing. Tears burned his eyes, but he held them back. He had cried too many times before, but this hurt in a different way. It wasn't just teasing, this was humiliation. In front of the whole school, he felt exposed, stripped, like someone had taken his heart, put it on a screen, and told the world to laugh. When he got home, he didn't speak to anyone. He shut his door, pulled the curtains, and threw his notebook into the back of the drawer. He didn't want to see it, didn't want to write, didn't want to feel anything. He lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling. His mind kept replaying the video, the laughing sounds, the flashing insults, the silence in the crowd. A quiet voice inside whispered, "You were stupid to think you could matter. You don't belong in the spotlight. This is what happens when you try." That night, he turned off his phone. He didn't want to see more views, more comments, more cruelty. The world outside could laugh all it wanted. He wasn't coming back. The next day, he skipped school, and the day after that, Mia messaged him. Miss Carter sent an email, but he didn't reply. He couldn't. He didn't want their pity. He just wanted the world to forget him. On the third night, something broke. He found himself sitting on the floor beside his bed, surrounded by silence. His chest felt heavy, like Something was pressing down on him from the inside. He whispered to the dark, "Why does it always end like this?" There was no answer, only the sound of his own breathing. And then, he remembered something. Something small. A moment. A voice, that younger boy from the hallway. The one who had said, "It made me feel like I wasn't the only one." That boy had meant it. Daniel hadn't just written for himself. His words had touched someone else, helped someone else feel seen. Was he really going to let a group of cowards take that away? He stood up, walked slowly to the drawer, pulled out the notebook. It was dusty now, a little bent, but still full of truth. He flipped to a blank page, held his pen above it, and for a long time, nothing happened. Then, he wrote, not a poem, not something perfect, just a line. "They can twist my voice, but they can't steal my fire." He stared at it for a long time. Then he wrote another, and another. Tears rolled down his cheeks. But this time, he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. He wasn't okay. Not yet. But he wasn't done. The fall had hurt him deeply. But in the pain, he found something even deeper. His voice wasn't just words on paper, it was a lifeline. Not just for him, but for others like him. And even though the world had tried to break him again, he would rise. The days after the video incident passed, slowly, like grey clouds drifting across a sunless sky. Daniel returned to school, but he moved through the halls like a shadow. No more smiles, no more conversations, just silence. People still looked at him, some with pity, some with curiosity, and some with smirks. But the storm had passed, at least, on the surface. The video stopped trending. The whispers faded, but the damage inside Daniel remained. He went to class. He answered when asked. But his spirit felt distant, like something inside him had gone quiet. Even Mia could sense it. She walked beside him to class, sat with him during lunch, but said little. She knew not to push. She was waiting for him to speak first. One afternoon, after a quiet day, she gently asked, "Are you still writing?" Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "No, not really." She didn't try to convince him, she just nodded. "Okay, but when you're ready, you should." That night, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the notebook he had pushed aside again. It rested on his desk, unopened. He didn't hate writing. He just didn't know who he was writing for anymore. Was it for himself, for others, or just a way to escape? He reached for the notebook, then pulled his hand back. Instead, he turned to his window and looked out at the night sky. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you think deeply. His mind drifted back to moments he had buried. He remembered sitting in the back row of the classroom years ago, doodling in his notebook, while everyone else laughed at a joke he didn't understand. He remembered his father's voice, not loud, not harsh, but distant. Always distracted, always working. Daniel had learned early to be his own listener, to talk to the page instead of the people around him. That night, the memories came one after another, each one a thread, not just of pain, but of resilience, of survival. He remembered reading his first poem to his reflection in the mirror. He remembered the fear, the thrill, the tears when Mia said his words mattered. And most of all, he remembered that boy, the one who had stopped him in the hallway to say, "I felt less alone." That boy didn't care about likes or shares. He cared about truth. That's what Daniel had given him, and that's what Daniel had almost forgotten. He stood up, walked to the mirror, looked at himself, not with judgment, but curiosity. "Why did I start writing?" he whispered. The answer came, soft but clear. To feel seen, to show what others hide. That was his gift. Not being loud, not being cool, but being real. That realization didn't fix everything, but it cracked something open, and in that crack, light returned. The next day, Daniel stayed after school and walked to Miss Carter's classroom. She looked up, surprised but happy. "I was hoping you'd come by," she said gently. He sat down in the chair across from her desk. "I haven't been writing," he admitted. She nodded. I understand. But I think I need to again. Not for contests, not to prove anything, just because it helps me breathe. Ms. Carter smiled. Then that's exactly why you should do it. There was a moment of quiet between them. Then Daniel asked, why do people laugh at what they don't understand? She thought for a moment. Because understanding takes effort, and fear makes people lazy. It's easier to laugh than to listen. Daniel nodded slowly. Then maybe I should help them listen. That, she said, is what great writers do. That evening, Daniel sat at his desk again. This time, he opened the notebook. He didn't care if the words were perfect. He didn't care if anyone else would read them. He just wrote. And the words flowed like they had been waiting. He wrote about fear, not as an enemy, but as a shadow that follows us all. He wrote about silence, not as weakness, but as a space for truth. He wrote about himself, not as a victim, but as a voice. Each line was like stepping closer to himself. He wasn't writing from pain anymore. He was writing from strength. Later that week, he was invited to a writing workshop downtown, a free event at the library. Ms. Carter had signed him up weeks ago. He almost didn't go, but he went. He sat in a room with strangers, all holding notebooks, all unsure. And when it came time to read, Daniel stood. His hands shook, his voice cracked, but he read anyway. And afterward, there was no laughter, just nods and quiet understanding. A man with grey hair came up to him after. Your words, they remind me of when I was young. Don't stop. The world needs more like you. Daniel smiled. For the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. The lesson wasn't about winning or revenge or being popular. It was about purpose. He had found something inside himself that no one could take away. Not Tyler, not fear, not shame. His voice was his own, and now he would use it, not just to rise, but to lift others. The auditorium lights were dimmed. Rows of chairs filled up one by one, and the quiet buzz of conversation echoed through the room. The school's annual Voices of Youth event was about to begin. A stage for anyone brave enough to stand up and share something real. Stories, poetry, truth. Ms. Carter had asked Daniel to sign up weeks ago. At first, he said no. Even now, backstage, he wasn't sure why he'd changed his mind. Maybe it was because of that man at the library. Maybe it was because of Mia, who smiled at him this morning and said, whatever happens tonight, I'm proud of you. Or maybe it was because of himself. The boy who had once believed he didn't matter, he had started to believe again. Daniel stood behind the curtain, his hands trembling slightly. He could hear the applause as the speaker before him wrapped up. Someone was telling a funny story. The crowd laughed warmly. He looked down at his notebook, pages worn at the edges, filled with ink and feeling. He didn't write this piece to impress. He wrote it because it had to be written. It was everything he'd held inside for years, everything he'd learned through pain, silence, and growth. This wasn't just a performance. This was his truth. His name was called. Up next, Daniel Hayes. For a moment, everything inside him screamed, run, but his feet moved forward. One step, then another. The stage was quiet. A single spotlight burned overhead. He could barely see the crowd, but he could feel them, all eyes on him. He took a breath and began. His voice was soft at first, but steady. He read from the page, but not like before. He wasn't hiding behind the words. He was inside them. They said silence meant weakness, but I found power in listening. They said pain was shame, but I found strength in scars. The room was still, no phones, no whispers, just listening. For years, I was a ghost in my own life, watching, hiding, hurting, not because I was nothing, but because no one took the time to see. His voice grew stronger. But now, I see myself, and I write not to be loud, but to be clear. Not to fight, but to feel. He paused, looked up from the page. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, you're not alone. I was that kid too, and I promise, there is nothing wrong with being different. There is only something wrong with being silent when your voice is the only thing that can set you free. When he finished, the silence lasted for a beat longer than expected. Then the first clap, then another, and another, until the room was filled with applause. Real applause. Not polite, not forced. True appreciation. Mia stood in the front row, clapping with tears in her eyes. Miss Carter had her hand over her heart, smiling like she had known all along. And somewhere near the back, the boy Daniel had once helped, nodded quietly. After the performance, Daniel stepped down from the stage. People reached out to shake his hand. Some just said, "Thank you." He didn't win a trophy. There was no contest tonight, no grand prize. But inside, something massive had shifted. For the first time, Daniel felt full, whole, worthy. Tyler didn't say a word. He stood near the exit, looking uncomfortable, arms crossed. For once, he had nothing to say, and Daniel didn't need anything from him. No apology, no approval. He had stopped living for other people's permission. Outside, the sky was dark, but peaceful. Daniel stood under the stars, breathing in the cool night air. Mia joined him a moment later. "You did it," she said softly. He nodded. "I didn't know if I could." "I did," she said. "And so did everyone else in there." He looked back at the building, the warm lights, the laughter, the people. Then he looked forward, into the quiet. "I think I know who I am now," he said. She smiled. "Who's that?" He looked at her, steady and calm. "Someone who finally believes his voice matters." He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. There would still be struggles, still moments of doubt. But something had changed forever. He had proven something, not just to the world, but to himself. That he could stand, that he could speak, that he could rise, even after falling hard. It wasn't fame. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't being the most popular, the most liked, or the most followed. It was something deeper. He had found his power. And now, there was no going back. Months passed. The seasons shifted from the cool breath of autumn to the heavy stillness of winter. Snow dusted the town's rooftops. The trees stood bare, their branches stretching toward the grey sky like arms that had let go of everything, but still stood tall. And Daniel, he had changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply. At school, he walked with his head up, not in arrogance, but with quiet confidence. He didn't rush to hide when he passed a crowd. He didn't shrink when he was called on in class. People noticed. Not because he had become popular, but because he had become real. They didn't whisper anymore. Not because they had all matured, but because they sensed something different in him, something grounded, something strong. Tyler still sat with his group, still the center of noise and laughter, but sometimes his voice sounded hollow, like he was trying too hard. And sometimes he looked at Daniel, not with cruelty, but with something closer to confusion or regret. He had never apologized. Daniel never expected him to. Some apologies come in silence, and some wounds don't need closure from the one who caused them. They heal through growth. Daniel's poetry started appearing in the school paper. Then, in a local youth magazine, people began sharing his words, not because they went viral, but because they felt true. Miss Carter called him her quiet fire. Mia called him Daniel, the one who didn't give up. And Daniel, he called himself a writer, not because he needed to be famous, but because it was who he was. One afternoon, a younger student, nervous, shy, walked up to him after class. "I read your poem, the one about the mirror," Daniel smiled. "Yeah?" The boy nodded. "It made me feel like I wasn't weird, like someone understood." Daniel's chest tightened, but in a good way. "I do," he said. "I really do." That night he sat on his bed, notebook in hand, as he often did now. His room was still the same, books stacked on the shelf, the quiet hum of life outside the window, but something inside him was forever different. He opened to a new page and began to write, not a poem this time, but a letter, not to anyone else, to himself, to the boy he used to be. "Dear me, I know you felt alone. I know the silence hurt more than the words. I know you thought no one would ever see you. But you were wrong. You are seen. You are loved. You are stronger than you know. The pain didn't break you. It built you. One day, you'll use that same pain to help someone else stand. And that day will feel like everything was worth it. He closed the notebook and leaned back, letting the words settle inside. That was the beauty of truth. It healed quietly, like sunlight on skin. At the end of year assembly, something unexpected happened. The principal called Daniel up on stage, not for grades, not for sports, but for impact. For reminding us, the principal said, that quiet voices can carry the loudest truths. Daniel walked across the stage, not nervous, not hiding. The students clapped. Some stood, even Tyler clapped once. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie ending, but it was real. And for Daniel, that was enough. Later that day, Mia found him at his locker. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small wrapped package. He opened it carefully. Inside was a pen, engraved with the words, "Your voice matters." He looked at her, eyes glassy. "Thank you," she smiled. "Keep writing. Some kid out there needs your story like you once needed someone else's." As winter turned to spring, Daniel sat beneath the large oak tree in the school courtyard. The same tree he once sat beneath to be alone. Now, it was his favorite place to write. Birds chirped above. The world felt open again. He flipped to a new page and wrote, "This isn't a story of fame, or revenge, or perfection. This is a story of falling hard and getting back up. A story of silence that found its sound. A boy they laughed at, who learned to laugh without fear, who turned pain into poetry, and who in the end discovered that being true was the loudest thing he could ever be." We don't always need to become someone else to prove we're worthy. Sometimes the journey is about returning to who we've always been, before the world tried to make us feel small. Hope is real. Healing is slow, but growth, that changes everything. If you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or unwanted, remember this: you are not alone. Your voice matters, and your story isn't over yet.